Hello, this is Gökmen Altay. I'm going to produce you the 19 base system codes on the positions and numbers of the words Allah and Al-Rahman in the Quran in all the 6,348 verses considering. And these evidences I'm going to present are from my book, In a Reproducible Miracle, which includes many different codings that suggest a system which I discovered in 2019 till 2020. And this presentation is taken on November 19, 2022. So why hypothesizing number 19 base system, a base coding system in Quran? This might be a question for someone who didn't hear about that before. There are two main reasons. First, in Quran, chapter 15, verse 9, we have indeed, Allah says, indeed, we alone have bestowed the reminder from on high, and we will most surely preserve it. Basically, from this verse, Muslims understands that the Quran has been sent down by God and it is going to be preserved by God. So we Muslims believe the Quran is intact, unchanged since the beginning, and this is a common knowledge. So historians, Quranic historians have studied in their own scientific area from the historical perspectives with respect to the records, historical reports, and come up with their books, their papers about the preservation of Quran. But another hypothesis we can say, since the Quran is a message, can we see a coding system over the text of Quran which might suggest a design? Therefore, if there's a design, there's a system, it means it is not the elements of the Quran, the components of the Quran, which are words and verses and so on, are also preserved, because if any of the elements are broken, are changed, are also added, we would not be able to see a system. So this is a hypothesis that comes based on the knowledge. And why do we use the number 19 or no other number? Is in another verse in Quran, chapter 74, verse 30. There is an independent verse. Over it are 19. So this verse is in the context of other verses given another meaning, a traditional meaning. But this might also be interpreted, in another way. Like, is there a 19-base system in the Quran? And there are some signs that might suggest us this kind of thinking. Actually, it's not out of a random or forced idea. For example, Quran has 114 chapters, which means 19 is a multiple of 19. And it is 6 times 19, right? So another sign, for example, so it's very simple. I mean, there are 114 chapters in Quran, so it's 19 times 6, multiple of 19. We have this verse already, and also, by the way, there is no other verse like that suggests a number independently, and we can contemplate on that if there's another coding system over this kind of independent number. This is the only one which we can hypothesize. Although some other numbers exist in Quran in the context of the verse, which has another meaning, obviously. Another sign, for example, simple sign that might suggest if there is something related to number 19 in Quran. For example, the first verse in chapter 1, verse 1, and it has 4 words. And you concatenate these numbers, 1, 1, 4, that is the same as the number of chapters. Again, it is multiple of 19. So these are, simple signs, very obvious, which might direct Muslims, thinking about that. Also, this is the first verse, by the way, which is a very famous verse in Quran. And this first verse is the most frequently repeated verse in Quran. It is repeated as 114 times, and it has 19 letters. If you use a computer and look at how many letters in this verse in any computer letter counter, you can see that. Another thing which I have discovered this actually while I was writing my book. So in this chapter 15:9, for the word reminder, the reminder, this refers to Quran, by the way. There are different words that refers to Quran, and in this case, Allah has used the word the reminder, not the Quran directly, not the book or something else, but reminder. So what is reminder actually? What does it refer to? Which aspect of Quran it refers to? It basically is not referring to the book, in a physical book, but the vocal version of Quran that half of people memorizes in their brain and then transmit and also vocally relate and recite the Quran. So basically the vocal version of Quran is referred to as reminder, or in Arabic al-zikr. As you see here, al, the, kr are the basic letters of this word in Arabic. So if you look at the frequency of this word, that's an interesting number. You can go to my book, and I have table of unique words. We can see how many times a word is used in Quran. First of all, let's go and see chapter 15 and verse 9, and take this verse. As you see, it's al-zikr. Let me show you here, al-zikr. We will take it and see how many times it is used, at least in this form. This is for the ones who knows Arabic. There are no harakat signs in this version that I used for this analysis, for all analysis in my book actually. And so this verse, at least with the letters, it is used like al, the, kr. Can say. When you go down and you look at the table of unique words, just paste that and see what. As we see, this al-zikr has been used exactly 19 times. When it is used with hierarchies, maybe it might sound like a different word, might be a different word, but at least the form of these, or in Arabic it's called resm, the structure of this word, alif, lam, zal, k, kaf, and ra, basically. These letters, al, z, kr, al-zikr, used 19 times. That's very interesting. And why? Because in chapter 15, verse 9, Allah says, we are going to surely preserve it. And the way the way we might see how it's preserved. This reminder maybe it's a 19-base system, because there's also another verse, it says overwritten R19. And these are the signs, in my opinion, we can that can direct us that maybe there's a 19-base system. We can hypothesize code system and test it based on these signs we see in the text. So it's not only the number of verses or verses, something like that, but also in the context, the meaning of the verses alone also directs us in this way. So there's also another interesting thing, not only al-zikr, the reminder. If you only look at the reminder, like the kr, let's take it and see how many times it is used. Again, let's come here and just not the l prefix, but we can just take the zikr and see how many times it is used. Again, if you look at that, this word, the kr, is used 38 times, 19 times 2. This is also a multiple of 19. So these are interesting signs that direct us based on these verses. Okay, how can we test it is preserved? Allah says, we will surely preserve it. But there might be something to measure it over the text. And when we look at the number of reminder, at least the resm, the structure of these this word. We observed it is used 19 times. Without the prefix the or al in Arabic, it is used 38 times, 9 times 2, 19 times 2. So these are very interesting and very interesting signs that suggest us maybe there's a 19-base system that can help us to measure if there's a 19-base coding over the text. And why should we think also there might be coding system? Because in general, the messages are coded in the modern time. If you are using any telecommunication device like mobile phone or computer, whatever, the information is transmitted after coding, after coded, and then in the receiver side it is decoded, and it is done against the distortion we expect over the medium. And the medium, in the medium, because we know there are noise, there might be some unexpected signals, it might distort the message. Therefore, there's a branch of science called, in technical terms, error control coding or message coding, and the messages, bits, basically digits, are coded. And then at the receiver side, we can understand if it is distorted, because then the decoded message doesn't match to the system that we have, the coding system we have. In a similar way, since the Quran is also a message, it might also have been coded. And if there is a system, 19-base system, then we can see, okay, the system is not broken. There is a system exists, statistically significant, that's what we observe. Then we can say, okay, then the Quran, these suggest that Quran is not changed, it's preserved as promised in this verse by Allah. Okay, let's then go to the next slide. So in the current presentation, I'm going to present you the system part that I observe with the word Allah and Al-Rahman, or in pronunciation Al-Rahman. And why do I also consider the word Al-Rahman is because of another verse in Quran, in chapter 17 and verse 110. Allah says to Prophet Muhammad, say, call Allah or Al-Rahman, Al-Rahman, in whichever way you call. His are the best names. So although there are many different names exist to refer Allah, only Ar-Rahman is the unique one we observe in a verse in Quran. It's kind of refers in this respect based on this verse Allah mentions here. It's kind of identical. Allah says in whichever way you call. So Ar-Rahman is a unique word, unique name of Allah. Therefore, so we can consider Ar-Rahman along with Allah in the coding that we are going to test. So both of them are tested and counted in our trials. Therefore, so again, as we see, the codings that we test have a base from the content of Quran. So let's first also introduce some basics about the text structure of Quran, because it is relevant to the codings I'm going to present. So there are 114 chapters in Quran, and there are 6,236 numbered verses, and there are also 112 unnumbered verses, which is the same verse, basically, Basmala verse, the first verse we observe in Quran. It is like open, the meaning is here. I'm gonna show you. In the name of in the name of Allah, the entirely merciful, the especially merciful. So in the name here, Bism, and Allah, the entirely merciful, Ar-Rahman, and the especially merciful, Ar-Rahim. Once again, in this verse, the two words are the relevant ones based on the Allah and Al-Rahman, based on the chapter 17 and verse 110 we are going to test. So this Basmala verse is special. It is used 112 times in as unnumbered in Quran, but also it is used 2 times as numbered verse. So the total number of Basmala verses also is 114. That's also another interesting sign that refers there might be 19 base system in Quran. So the structure of Quran, as you see, is different. So we have numbered verses and we have some repeated unnumbered verses we observe in the beginning of chapters. Therefore, what I observe is there are two text types, and 6,236 numbered verses is one text type we categorize right now, and the second text type is the old verse that refers all verse, including unnumbered ones, unnumbered Basmala verses. 6,348 total verse we have. So therefore, in my book, all the codes have been applied to both text types, and that is included in the statistical calculations when we compute the probability of what we observe. And especially also another unique thing in Quran, in chapter 9, chapter 9 does not have Basmala verse, unnumbered Basmala verse at its beginning, as opposed to all the other chapters. And that might mean that these unnumbered verses have a unique structure and they should be there, because we don't observe it in the beginning of chapter 9. Is a bizarre case. Only chapter 1 also has numbered Basmala verse, not the others. Okay. So how do we get the numbers? So in my book, I use mainly the natural numbers, which means we observe from the text, not some abject numbers like for each letter or something like that. But we just count the number of verses, chapters, words, this kind of natural numbers, so that they are just clear truth exists in the text that anyone can count. So in this system I'm going to present, it is based on the word Allah and Al-Rahman. So how do you count the word Allah? Means God. So we only count this word alone. We don't look at any prefixes and suffixes case of this word Allah. Only Allah word alone, just like we observe in the Basmala verse, that special verse, Bismillah. So as we see, Allah is unique. As you see, there is no suffix, no prefix along with Allah. Normally, there are many other cases there are. So we count only this word. So, for example, this is the first verse, Basmala verse. In this verse, we observe Allah. So we can count this. So this is the table we make to get the numbers. So G refers to general verse index, that's general order basically. Normally this is not the primary index we use, but it is there. We can keep it, general verse index. But this is secondary again, as I said. The main way we point to any verse is this chapter index and special verse index. C, which I say for chapters I use, and V for special verse indexes. So we say, okay, chapter 15, verse 19, for example, verse 9, for example. Okay, therefore, which verse is this? It is the verse, chapter 1 and verse 1. This verse, we observe how many Allah word? We observe one Allah word. Therefore, we put one here. So all one. So we obtained the first information from the Quran. So we look at all those 6,348 verses when we look at the second text category. And when we look at this first text category, 6,236 numbered verses, that's another table we are going to generate. So we do that. Again, just to remind you, we use this this Allah word only. It is the most frequent one that is used with respect to other ones. So there are other versions of this word Allah with prefixes or suffixes, but we don't use them. We don't count them here in these codes in the system. It's only based on the Allah alone. So where do we observe this word Allah in Quran? We just get the indexes. So as we see, the next time we observe this same word Allah is in chapter 2 and verse 7. Therefore, we take it. Okay, chapter 2, C, and verse 7. And how many times we observe in this verse? One time. We write it here. And GV refers to the general order, general verse index. This is again secondary. I just keep it here because in the secondary codes, there's also another coding. I'm going to show you about that. But this is secondary. So it means the 14th verse from the beginning, we observe this verse. So we have these numbers we have generated. And the next time so this is chapter 2, 7, verse 7, and there are 1 times we observe the word Allah. Then we look at the next verse we observe, and we continue this way. And next time we observe the word Allah is in chapter 2 and verse 9, and we observe 1 time. And if you look at the general order, general verse index, it is 16. Again, this is secondary. Then we get a table. So this is based on the numbered 6,236 verses. And this is information that we will see if there are 19-based codings that might suggest a system based on a rule-based coding pattern. And as we see, the black ones are the main numbers, we can say. So C and V refers to the positions information, the main positions information. This is the most natural one. We say, okay, chapter 15, verse 9, for example. And these are the chapters and verses we observe the word Allah. These are the number of times we observe in those verses. And these are the general verse indexes. So if you look at this table, for example, we observe this word Allah 1,566 times in the 6,236 verses. 1,566 verses actually. There might be more observations in one verse. So we also, again, as I said, we also look at the total verses which means 6,348 verses as well. If you look at it the same way, then we observe the second table. And in the second table, as you see, I just made the titles with capital letter to make it distinct. And also there's something else here. For example, the verses, some verses has number 0 and red. These are just for the completeness of the table here, because the unnumbered Basmala verses doesn't have a number. I don't use any number to refer to those unnumbered verses in all my codes in my book. But in this table, to refer them, I just use the 0 to just show them. But in the computations, I never use these zeros. So this means in the beginning of the chapter, we have this chapter 2, verse 0, the first verse, with an unnumbered verse, has one Allah word, which is the Basmala verse, because in the Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, in that we have, in the name of Allah, that Allah word in it. And this, the general order of that is 8. As we see, it is not here in the numbered verses, for example. There are no unnumbered verses in the numbered verses table. So the same way we obtain the second table, and we have now 2 tables, and we will try the coding pattern that we observe. The second type of table, category of table, like, let's say, we get also in the similar way for the word Al-Rahman. As I said, we are going to look at these 2 words of Allah only, Allah and Al-Rahman, because of the unique verse I just shared. They look like identical with respect to that verse. And when we look at in 6,236 verses, we observe the word Al-Rahman, here this red one in Arabic. Just you need to copy and paste this one and see how many times it is used. It is observed in 45 verses. But when we also look at include the unnumbered verses, the Basmala verse, in all of them we observe it. Therefore, we have 157 times we observe. And we get this table in a similar way we have done for Allah word. The other category I defined and tested and observed is, since in the chapter, in the verse, Allah says either just use whatever the word you want, either Allah or Al-Rahman, then I also said, okay, let's look at them together, any of them. if they exist in a verse, I just take their verse, Allah and or Al-Rahman verse, how many times and in which verses we observe. And then again, in the same way, I get the numbers and we get 2 tables. So we have 3 categories. In each category, we have 2 tables. We are going to test the same coding pattern, basically. And the first code based on these numbers we obtained from Quran. So basically, since we are right now measuring the positions of the Allah word, it covers all the house recitations, which is the most common Quran recitation used by Muslims, 97% of Muslims. So we can say it is the most kind of universal. These are the most universal codes, we can say. So in this code, which I define as evidence from my point of view, based on the overall system I observe, therefore I categorize this as evidence, this code. This is based on Allah word positions in 6,236 verses. Okay. And okay. And again, from the table I obtained in the beginning, I used that table, and in that we use the most natural indexes, position indexes, the chapter and special verse index. So chapter 1, verse 1, chapter 2, verse 7. So the rule is we concatenate the natural numbers in the natural order. So using this table that uses the most natural numbers to refer to any verse, like chapter 1, verse 1, and we just concatenate. The rule is this: concatenate the concatenation of the natural numbers in the natural order. So basically, chapter 1, verse 1 is concatenated in their natural order, 1, 1. And for the second row, chapter 2, verse 7 is concatenated within itself, 2, 7, and 2, 9, and it goes on. And in the end, for example, the last 2 observation we have in the chapter 110, verse 2, chapter 112, verse 1, and chapter 112, verse 2. So when you concatenate them, for example, the last one, 1, 1, 2, 2, 1, 1, 2, 2, as you see here, purple. And then the next thing is again the concatenation of these numbers in their natural order. So there's another combination: 1, 1, 2, 7 here. Just take this 1, 1 here, 1, 1, and then 2, 7 next, and then 2, 9 next, and then it goes until the end. The last one is 1, 1, 2, 2. Before that, there is 1, 1, 2, 1, the blue one, and then 1, 1, 0, 2 before that. So this is a big number. So how big is that? It is 5,732 digits length, big number. And that represents the position of the word Allah in the numbered verses, 6,236 numbered verses of Quran. And just to make sure you can easily imagine how long is that, what kind of number is it? At the background, you can see a single number. So the beginning of that is, as you see on the top left corner, 1, 1, 2, 7. Here, it is the beginning of this big number, 1, 1, 2, 7. And if you look at the tail of it, the end of it, we see the last 4 digits are 1, 1, 2, 2, as we see in here, purple 1, 1, 2, 2. So this big number, 5,736 digits, big number. When we test this, it is multiple of 19. So this is observed as the first code. If it was alone, we would say, okay, maybe this might be observed by chance, but we have other codes as well based on those 6 tables we have. Together we will look at them. And this answers the question: is there a 19-base coding of the positions of the word Allah in the full text of Quran? And it's we observe it is yes. And it might be part of system or not. And we will decide in the end. But is there a 19-base coding, meaningful coding? Yes. The rule is concatenation of natural numbers in the natural order. By the way, in the coding algorithms, the concatenation of the numbers is one of the most common coding approach. It's not a simple sum mathematical approach, yes, but it is one of the most common algorithms when we concatenate the bits with respect to an algorithm. Okay, so the next coding is using the second table of Allah. So we observed Allah word positions has a 19 base code in the numbered verses. What about the unnumbered verses? 6,348 verses in that. Again, in the same way we observe, we get a big number which has 5,964 digits, big number, and again it is multiple of 19. So we observe what happened here. I mean, in the same way we get this big number, chapter 1, verse 1, and you get this colorful big number. At the background, you can see that this is the second big number we have. So remember, we had two tables from either numbered verses only, 6,236, and also all the verses, 6,348 verses, second table. In both of the tables, when we look at the chapter and verse indexes, this rule, concatenation of natural numbers in the natural order, which means the chapter and verse indexes concatenation, gives us a single unique number that represents the position of the Allah word in the full text of Quran, and both of the numbers, based on the same coding pattern, has the exact same code, and both of them are multiple of 19. Okay, so next, remember we had 6 tables based on the hypothesis we had, based on those verses. And second category of tables were based on Al-Rahman in, again, both Quran text types, 6,348 and 6,236 verses. And we observe the same coding pattern for Al-Rahman in the table of the all verses, 6,348 verses table. So not in two tables right now. We observe the same coding pattern in one of those tables, those two tables right now, with respect to the Al-Rahman word only. And again, in the same way, when you concatenate, for example, 1, 1, 1, 3, and then in the end 1, 1, 4, as you see, there is no 0 here. We don't take it. This is the general rule, because zeros refer to the unnumbered basmala verses. There is no number we observe in the text of Quran, therefore we don't use any number for them. Therefore, we just take the chapter index for when we come across with them to represent them. So when we concatenate them in the natural order again, there's no other combination. We get this big number, and the length of this number is 406 digits big number, and it is again multiple of 19. So same coding pattern what happened observed in Al-Rahman, for Al-Rahman as well, just like we observed for Allah. Okay, then the next coding, and remember, why did we test this Al-Rahman again? For this verse, chapter 17 and 110, call Allah or Al-Rahman in whichever way you call. His are the best names, and so on. The fourth code we observe is using Allah and or Ar-Rahman word together, either of them, any of them. Whenever we observe either Allah or Ar-Rahman or together, we take that verse. So again, in the same way we get that, and when we get that, we get this big number. The length of this big number is 5,887 digits big number. And again, this number, the same coding pattern, and at the background we see that it starts with 1113 here from the top left corner, 1113, and in the end we should have 1122. In the end we have 1122. This big number is also multiple of 19 with the same coding pattern, considering any of the Allah or Ar-Rahman words in the full text of Quran. So we had 6 tables basically. Out of those 6 tables, when we apply the same coding pattern, we observed 4 successes. So if we have 6 trials and 4 successes, so that shows us what? Is there a 19-made system with respect to the positions of the word Allah and Ar-Rahman in the full text of Quran? And it looks, yes, statistically. So when we look at the probability observation, only for these 4 successes out of 6 trials, with respect to positions only, this coding pattern suggests, remember, for each test, we have the probability of success by chance is 1/19. And then using the binomial test, we observe approximately 1 in a 10,000 chance of observing such a system by chance alone. So it is very small probability, we can say it suggests, at least statistically, it is not by chance, but it should be by design. But one may argue, actually, let's say there's a very skeptical person. Okay, in the table you also had the frequencies of the words. Why don't you use that in the same coding pattern? That's another argument. But in this case, it doesn't refer only to the positions. It answers something else. Another question, like positions and word. Is there the same coding pattern in the positions and the frequency of the word? This answers another question. But let's say someone wants to consider them together. And for the sake of argument, if we consider that, that means we have to double the number of trials we have from 6 to 12. And let's say we don't have any success on that. And then we have 4 successes out of 12 trials in this case. Then the probability of that becomes, in this case, 0.0026. So it is 2.6 out of 1,000 chance by observing, by chance alone. And it's again significant, statistically significant, less than 0.05. Therefore, still we can say, at least this doesn't suggest it can happen by chance alone, statistically. But in this case, there is something, even if there is such an objection that forces us to consider 12 trials, then we have to also consider the account that we only observe those success in one of the categories, only positions, for example, not randomly distributed over those 12 trials. Therefore, we have to take into account, if we take that into account as well, then the probability of observing such a 4 success in one of the answers of the questions, like on the positions in this case, not at all on the frequencies as well, then we have a smaller probability than this one, the random one, and that is 1 in 1,000, actually, approximately. And therefore, again, this is a small probability. Statistically, we can say the observation we have suggests a system, a design based on the word Allah, positions in Quran. Therefore, we say we observe at least there's a 19-base system in the Quran, and since it is not, since we observe the system, it means that there's a design. If there's a design which is not broken, which means, for example, if the order of those verses has changed, or there was additional verse which included Allah, or there was something missing with the word Allah, which is one of the most common, the second most common word actually in Quran, then we would not observe, most likely not observe this system. And therefore, this system that we observe in the Quran supports the hypothesis that the Quran is intact and changed, because there is a statistically significant and meaningful 19-base system in the Quran. But it is not only that. There are also additional 2 meaningful evidences with the general verse indexes, which I had mentioned before, but it is secondary. We don't use actually in general, not at all actually. We don't refer to verse with respect to the general verse index. Like we don't say, okay, look at the verse ordered in the general verse index like 5,401. No, we don't say that, but it is there. It is as a secondary information. It is there. We can, if you want, locate a verse based on this information. And remember, I had put that in the red color in the table as a secondary information. I also tested the same coding pattern, only using not right now chapter and verse indexes, but looking at only the order of these verses. Same coding pattern. What is that? The concatenation of the natural numbers in the natural order. In this case, we don't have CV, we only have GV, like general order index. And when we do that, again, we have 2 tables for Allah. And we observe this in the Allah word and also Allah and or Al-Rahman verse. There were 6 tables, remember. Out of those 6, we observe in 2 of them as success. And these are the codes in the Allah word. This code index refers to my book, but it's going to be upgraded and might be changing, the 6121 in the next update. Code Allah word positions in general verse order in 6,236 verses with respect to. Again, these are the numbers from first verse, 14th verse, 16th verse. The last one we observe in 6,223rd verse. And at the background, we see this number. It's a 5,719 digits length number. It's a very interesting number. At the background, The length of this number is also multiple of 19, and it's very clear, 57 and 19 together, as we see. That's interesting, additional interesting thing, although the secondary, we have some additional signs that suggest this is a part of the system, I can say. And this shows the same 19-based coding pattern, not only in the chapter and special word indexes, but also in the general order of the verse. Because remember, this Allah word positions had the same coding pattern. If you look at only chapter and special verse index, natural way. But if you also look at the general verse order in the numbered verses, we also observe the same coding pattern. So therefore, I consider this as part of the general system based on this coding pattern. And the next time we observe the success out of those 6 tables is in the Allah and Al-Rahman word positions together with respect to the 6,348 verses. And again, when you concatenate the natural numbers, general verse orders of these verses in the natural order, which means there is no other combination, and therefore this big number has the length 6,318 digits length big number, and it's again it's multiple of 19. So we have right now in total 6 successes out of 12 trials with respect to the positions. And if you look at the probability, so if you look at the probability of overall observed system so far, we have 12 trials and 6 successes in total, with each probability of being 1/19 as success by chance. Therefore, the approximate probability with respect to only the positions of the Allah and Al-Rahman words that we observe in Quran, these codes suggest a system because the observation of this probability is approximately 1.5 over 100,000. Very small probability. But again, for the sake of argument, let's say we also want to include the counts, the frequencies of those words, but it answers another question again, as I mentioned. Then if we just double the number of trials from 12 to 24 out of 6 successes out of 24 trials, then we have this approximate probability as 1.2 over 1,000. Again, this is quite significant, and we can say still it's not. We don't conclude that it's not based on chance. It should be a design. However, since they are all clustered in the positions and not the frequencies tables, so we have 2 categories, we have to include them. This event in the probability calculation in that case. Then we have 6 successes clustered in the index columns only, basically, not including any frequency of word. Therefore, if we can include that events, which means even considering 24 tests, but considering all are clustered in the only positions information, then this system has a probability of 3.5 out of 100,000. And we can say 3.5 over 10,000, sorry, 10, 100, 1,000, 10,000. So we have 3.5 out of 10,000 probability that this kind of system might be observed by chance alone. And it's very small probability, we can say. And there are some facts. So in my book, I have observed some codings. They looked interesting, but since they don't come like this with a cluster of codes that together suggest a system systematically based on a rule. But still, if they are very interesting, I just categorize them as fact, but not part of the general system. They stay there as potential codings that might be in the future might be part of a system, maybe, or that might be meaningful as it is alone. Let's look at them. This is we can look at in my book here in this link. This is my book link. It's free online. So in this one, if we include the word frequencies as well in the same table, code 1 says, the fact 1 says as fact 1, in all 6,348 verses, sum of all these numbers are multiple of 19. What are those numbers? Chapter indexes, verse indexes, and the number of the frequencies of these words, number of times we observe those words, for example, Allah word in this case, in this table, in these verses. And then just sum them. We got a number which is 136,078, and this number is a multiple of 19. Because this coding is very simple, just sum up all the numbers that looked meaningful. But not only that, if we look at the second text type of Quran, which means the numbered verses, 6,236, in this way, the sum of them gives us this 24,586, and this is the digit sum of this is in this case multiple of 19 and not itself. We can say these are the basically, if you write all these numbers, not some, but just if you just take the digit sum of these numbers, not the sum of them, in all the verses, 6,348 verses, we had taken the non-decimal sum normally. But here, if you take just the digit sum in the numbered verse case, then the long number, the big number which has length 24,586, it is that big number is multiple of 19 as well. We haven't looked at the digit sums. So these two codes looked quite interesting to me. I just shared that in my book as facts. So by the way, all the codes have been discovered by myself, present in this presentation, and also mostly in my book. And these codes can also be seen as a thread on Twitter I had shared. You can have a look if you are interested. And as a general reminder, I want to read this because these are my conclusions, and I need to mention that again based on what I observe. It doesn't mean they're absolute truth. So general reminder, in 2019, I discovered the Quran's 19-base coding system and published it in my book titled Reproduce Miracle in this link. You can see in bookdown.org. It's freely available. The 19-base system codings are based on all Quran texts, which refers to 6,348 verses in general. It suggests that the Quran in our hands has not changed. This is my rational assessment in the light of the system I have discovered. Only God knows the absolute truth, of course. If there is an error, it is my own, but not intentional. If there are errors, my book is still online available. It's still only available on the internet so that the reviewers can report it and I can correct if necessary. If you see an error, you can inform it via comments or Twitter. Every code proposal that does not comply with scientific methods should be disproven and rejected. The 19 system I discovered in my book and present in my book has nothing to do with the earlier famous false 19 system claim that Rashad Khalifa had made up with manipulation by removing 2 verses. In fact, my 19 system proposal further exposed the falseness of false 19, which Rashad and his disciples, Edip Yüksel and so on, advocates. In summary, my 19 system claim in Quran exposes all current and future claims with any manipulation.